If you enjoy the content on this channel, then you no doubt have a passion for true crime and mystery. I myself, for years, have thought about finding a clue or overlooked piece of information that would crack a cold case wide open. And while that hasn't happened yet, I can still get that feeling thanks to the sponsor for today's video, Hunt-A-Killer. You have probably heard of them, and for good reason. But if this is your first time, allow me to explain the treat that you can be in for. Hunt-A-Killer is a box set that has you playing lead detective to help solve a cold case. With each box, the ongoing story is unfolded, and you are tasked with combing through police records, coroner's reports, witness testimonies, and so much more in an attempt to solve a case that is by no means simple. It's the perfect idea for a date night with your special someone, a great way to have fun with friends over drinks, or it can even be done solo if you're the renegade detective type. Each box comes with extremely detailed and authentic pieces to really throw you into the atmosphere. I'm not even joking, I was playing one of the box sets and I completely forgot that this was a game, due to the fact that I am learning information about suspects from handwritten letters and reading a death report that is so detailed I couldn't even tell if it was real or fake. So, if this sounds like your idea of a fun time, you will also get the added bonus of knowing that you will be part of a community with over 100,000 active members. And to top it off, part of the proceeds go to the Cold Case Foundation. This is honestly a game that was made by true crime lovers for true crime lovers. Right now, you can go to huntakiller.com/cadaver and use code cadaver for 20% off your first box. Again, make sure to use code cadaver for a 20% off discount. But first, you have to ask yourself, do you have what it takes to hunt a killer? I have always argued that one of the best type of mysteries out there are those that have both closure and vagueness. Stories that are so wrapped up in so many twists and turns that by the end of it, you are left with both solid and concrete answers and troubling unanswered questions. To me, it gives you the best of both. We all seem to have this never-ending fascination with mysteries and how they came to be. And many of us find ourselves diving deep into the internet rabbit hole to attempt to solve that one question that would surely crack the entire case wide open. It feeds our growing desire to learn and understand, because truly, once a mystery is finally solved, it is rarely ever talked about again. So we seem to hyper-focus on those just right stories, where there is plenty of information available to not only make a timeline and start connecting the red string, but also vague enough to leave us scratching our heads. Where the right answer is just in front of us, yet we are looking in every other direction. And this is exactly the kind of story that I have for all of you today. In what has since been known as the Persian Princess Mystery, it is a lesser-known story that happened back in the year 2000. With updates on it being as recent as 2016. With many saying those involved were driven solely by money, others have seen it as a means of sacrifice for a higher order. So sit back and take your notes as I tell you the mystery of the Persian Princess. Our story begins in March of 2000, and it all started with a videotape. The video in question showed what appeared to be a mummy clearly inside a sarcophagus. The rarity of this alone created a lot of talk around the black market in which the video was shown around. It was so rare, in fact, that police were actually made aware of this bizarre item for sale. The normal thing some would think of when hearing the term black market would be what most movies and TV shows depict, a place where criminals sell firearms, drugs, people, or any other nefarious item. Yet, while some of that is true, many use the black market simply to avoid paying tax on items. In fact, it is actually more focused on that rather than people attempting to buy enough guns to equip a small army. Even then, however, a mummy inside of a sarcophagus is still anything but normal. After the investigation from Pakistani police, the videotape was actually linked back to a man named Ali Akbar. When questioned by the police, Akbar told them that he didn't even have the mummy from the video and that he was simply paid to film it and to put it on the black market for a potential buyer to see. Other than that, he had no involvement in the exchange between any buyer or seller. The only other information that he could give was that the man who hired him to make the video was living in Quetta, the capital city of Balochistan. There they would find the man Akbar was hired by, a man named Wali Muhammad Riki, whom was a tribal leader and the actual seller of the mummy. This information took police to the capital city, and they quickly were able to confront Riki and question him about why he was actually trying to sell the mummy on the black market, and more importantly, how he even found it. When interrogating Riki, police learned that he was not the man who actually found the mummy. He was, however, in possession of both the mummy and the sarcophagus. Riki led police to the morbid treasure, and to their shock, they really were looking at the real thing. Before this time, there was a lot of skepticism that the mummy was even real, and figured it to just simply be a hoax. But what stood out to police and Riki was just how genuine it all appeared. Riki wasn't done with this information though, and informed police that he was not the person responsible for finding the mummy. That instead went to a man named Sharif Shah Baki, and he would cause this entire story to flip over on itself. After a few months, police were able to track down Baki. He was an Iranian man living in a small town called Quran. Baki retold the same story that Riki did in every detail. He claimed that he found the sarcophagus sticking out of the ground after a recent earthquake in the area. Following up his story, police were able to confirm that an earthquake had taken place in the recent months before the discovery, so that part did seem to check out. However, Riki and Akbar had both since been arrested for breaking Pakistani laws by attempting to sell a historical artifact. It was learned that the plan was for Riki to find a buyer on the black market and sell it to whomever that may be, and in turn both Riki and Baki would split the profits. And the profits were a life-changing amount of money. They were asking for 600 million rupees, or $11 million. Splitting that money in half would easily set the men and their families up for life. And for it to also not be taxed, since they were selling it on the black market, meant even more money in their pockets. For unknown reasons, police did not arrest Baki after questioning him. They did, however, inform him that no sale would be made, since he was attempting to sell the mummy in a different country with different laws in place than that of Iran. This alone created a legal battle down the road, but I will get into that part a bit later on. For the time being, Baki was free, but police had every intention of returning to his home and arresting him when they could. They would never get the opportunity to do that though, as when they returned to Baki's home weeks later, he was nowhere to be found, and they have been unable to find him ever since. Police now doubt that Sharif Shah Baki was even his real name. After the mummy and sarcophagus were collected by the police, the items were sent to Pakistan's National Museum for study, and what they discovered shocked them. The mummy was aged at over 2,600 years old, and this wasn't just a normal person inside the sarcophagus either. Mummification was only used on those of high nobility, due to the process it took from going from first having the body to closing and locking the sarcophagus. Once done, the sarcophagus would normally be placed inside of a room with relatives of the deceased for them to eternally rest. These rooms, or more so tombs, were typically decorated with treasures that the family had in their possession. So basically, the fact that they found a mummy in the first place meant that whoever this was of high importance at some point in history. The question now was, who was it? After further studies, researchers believed that the body was that of Rhodagun, a Persian princess who was the daughter of Xerxes, the king of Persia. A find of this magnitude would be incredible to both history and the world itself. This wasn't just a regular soldier or forgettable nobleman. It was the daughter of one of the most well-known kings in history. It was also rare due to the fact that the remains of any of the bloodline of Xerxes have been lost to time. Rhodagun was the only physical proof of that line. This started a lot of controversy in the historic and archaeological community, as many argued that if it were in fact her, then why would she be in a sarcophagus when she wasn't even Egyptian, as Persians were in fact never buried in sarcophaguses. Another theory was that she could have been kidnapped by Xerxes as a child and upon her death was given burial rites that aligned her with her true heritage. Earlier I mentioned that Pakistan and Iran became enthralled in a legal battle over the mummy, and the reasoning for this was due to Iran stating that the mummy was of Persian origin, and since Iran is modern-day Persia, that it rightfully belongs to them. Pakistan argued that since the mummy and sarcophagus were found within the borders of Pakistan, that it belonged to them. The back and forth between Iran and Pakistan went on for some time, but ultimately, rights went to Pakistan and Rhodagun was placed in the National Museum of Pakistan. Due to this back and forth, Iran eventually hired several archaeologists to see if they could find any information that would prove a particular country's ownership. This in turn created a lot of media attention on the case, and other archaeologists were as well interviewed, even some who had nothing to do with this mystery. Yet, by chance, an American archaeologist was interviewed by a magazine company and was given the details on the entire ordeal. And he began to tell a story that would unravel this entire debate and would create an even bigger confusion for everyone. The archaeologist in question was Oscar White Muscalera, and he told a story about being contacted by a group of men months prior who were trying to sell him a mummy. The men also sent Muscalera something that I mentioned at the very start of this story, a videotape that showed both the mummy and sarcophagus, the same tape that Akbar had made that started this entire mystery. But shady people, or wild stories, or even two countries politically arguing over the rightful ownership isn't what caused Muscalera to say no to the sale. He said no to it because it was a fake. The fake claim that was being made was largely due to the breastplate on the sarcophagus that was filled with grammatical errors and was historically inaccurate. An example being that one of the scripts on the breastplate was from an inscription that didn't exist at the time of the death of Rhodagun. Further investigating started to shed more light on this being a fake, as the method of how the body was mummified was extremely inaccurate, and some of the writing wasn't even Persian at all. The final nail in the coffin came when Iranian scientists discovered that the wood used in the sarcophagus was only 250 years old, a far cry from the original idea that it was over 2,600 years old. And after that discovery, scientists also discovered pencil marks on the breastplate and around the inscriptions. The long debate over ownership was over nothing more than an elaborate hoax. However, one very obvious question remained. The sarcophagus was clearly fake, but the body inside was very much real. Only who was it? And was everybody now looking at a murder? After discovering that the find of the century was a hoax, scientists and authorities now had to figure out exactly who was the supposed famous mummy. When analyzing the body, they were able to figure out that it was in fact a female, and that she was somewhere between the ages of 20 and 25 upon her death. Yet, any small hope that they had that this was the body of a famous princess were quickly deflated when an autopsy showed that she had no signs of a traditional Egyptian mummification process, and her body was also filled with both salt and baking soda. They then discovered that the woman had died sometime in the early 90s. Any other information about her was unable to be found. Some assumed that she was from Iran more than likely, but anything past that would be shooting in the dark. Due to the condition of her body, identifying her was next to impossible, and the only thing anyone could do from there on was form possible theories. One of those theories was that the woman was a victim of grave robbing and had her body used in the scheme. Yet, that theory tends to be the lesser one looked at since, during the autopsy, they discovered that she had a large fracture at the base of her neck from a blunt instrument. This fueled the theory that this woman was murdered and then had her body used by a group of sickos as a get-rich-quick scheme. This led to many pointing fingers at Akbar, Rini, and the mysterious Baki. Yet, no evidence other than the fact that this woman could have been murdered was there. And even then, people argued that she could have received the injury by accident and nothing menacing. Due to this, nobody was ever charged with her slaying. Akbar and Rini were both charged with fraud, and Baki still remains on the loose. There are those who think Baki was the real mastermind behind all of this, and simply cut his losses and fled once he was interviewed by police, maybe knowing that they would eventually discover the whole thing was a fake. And that was why he got the other two men involved, to distance himself from the entire thing. But again, that is simply just a theory. For now, the mystery of the Persian princess remains partially unsolved. We know it was a hoax, yet we still have no idea who the female was, nor the location or identity of Baki. In 2008, the unknown woman was finally given a proper burial and will hopefully remain at peace. In 2016, to honor the woman, an exhibition named The Persian Princess was put on display in Jerusalem by artist Hilly Greenfield. It was made to forever remember the unfortunate woman whose life and rest was taken from her. I hope you all enjoyed this mystery. I definitely thought that this one would go over well with all of you, and would start a discussion on it in the comments. I am actually very curious as to what all of you think. Do you think that Baki was responsible for it, or simply found it? Was Rini telling the full truth? Let me know what all of you think. Special thanks again to this video's sponsor, Hunt-A-Killer, and another thank you to the patrons: Borgov the Straightener, KCD, Jace, A Dumb Thought, Lena, OOD Hamhorde, Ryan93, Espeeve, Sir Tony, Skelly, Andis, Bethany, Blake, Boop, D. Wilson, Marilena Pendoja, Riley Brennan, Math Won't Miss You, and Cat God. Stay safe out there, friends. Good night.